Thank you so much, everyone, for the warm welcome, and I appreciate you having me here. Thank you also for listening and for being willing to understand this message that not many people are even willing to face. So I want to start with a question, and you guys can just raise your hand if your understanding of child sex trafficking in the USA, before we even get into the nitty-gritty, let me just start with some staggering statistics. So as we know, human trafficking is a massive global issue. But what if I told you that the USA is actually the main source and destination of human trafficking in the entire world? What if I told you that, okay, so there are various forms of trafficking. If we narrow human trafficking down to child trafficking, there are various forms of trafficking: sex trafficking, labor trafficking, domestic servitude, and a lot of other things. Child sex trafficking, not just child abuse, but the sexual exploitation and sale of children in the United States is generating at least $50 billion every year annually. That's more than all professional sports combined. That's more than most major corporations. So here's my question. Do you think that this issue on a leadership level, do you think that it's incompetence, or do you think that it's intentional? Now, you can think about that question as I continue to unpack that. And what I mean by intentional is that, again, to frame this problem, it's the second largest criminal enterprise on the planet. So of all the terrible things happening in the world right now, the sale and exploitation of children is the fastest growing. It's the second largest, and it is the most profitable. Do you think it's incompetence, or do you think it's intentional? Now, let me ask you another rhetorical question. Why doesn't our federal government have a dedicated agency focused on combating human trafficking? Of all the three-letter agencies, of all the things our tax dollars fund, of all the good we do in the world, why don't we have a focused federal agency? Said a different way, why is the government not even pretending to care? So I'll tell you about my story today, and I want you to realize that my story is specific to me. There are so many variables in how this looks and how this happens and what different children and survivors are experiencing. There are so many variables. I could give you 100 specifics and it wouldn't be all encompassing. So like I said, I was born and raised into an international religious cult. My parents thought it was a good idea to produce us for the sake of this cult's ideologies and mission, if you will. So I'm the youngest of, I have 4 older siblings, and there are 2 reasons that I did not suffer worse abuse in my childhood. One is that I was born last, so I experienced the least amount of terrible things. The second was because around the time I was born, in the early 90s, there was a series of international raids. So this was an international religious cult, mostly Americans, mostly American children, trafficked all over the world, in addition to many other forms of abuse. There were about 40 to 50,000 members. There were about 10 to 20,000 children, more like 20-something thousand children. So I was born in Brazil. I was raised mostly in Brazil and Mexico. My older siblings, though, compared to my upbringing, our upbringing was almost night and day different in terms of the intensity of abuse. So around the time I was born, there was a series of international raids where enough people had escaped this cult and notified local authorities, to the extent that they coordinated efforts to storm these compounds, and they arrested the adults and they took the children into institutions. Now I'm going to speed up this very long story because I want to highlight some really important takeaways. One is that there's a misconception that just because a child is rescued means a child is safe. So I'm going to give the local authorities in these third world countries the benefit of the doubt that they did not know what to expect. They did not know that there were 30, 50, 75 children in these compounds. and they did not have the resources to support them. But when the children were rescued and taken to these third world country institutions, there was a lot of harm that happened there. And without saying more, some children even died in those institutions. Now, to further speed up the story, over the course of a couple years, there ended up being an international court case. And yes, there are court documents and evidence. And on an international level, the judge acquitted the entire group. The group was acquitted. Never mind, go home, everyone's fine. Children were returned. Not one adult was convicted. So unpack that corruption on an international level and unpack the failure of the US government, in addition to other countries' governments, failing us as American children. Our story should have ended there. We should have been rescued. The US government should have safeguarded us. What happened instead is that the cult was forced to pretend to be less abusive. So I say this often about the aspect and the importance of awareness when it comes to the topic of child trafficking. Awareness is not just a feel-good term. Awareness reduces the predator's ability to operate. It makes it harder for bad guys to get away with doing bad things when we, the people, are aware. Look at the Jeffrey Epstein situation. It took a decade to make that to the actual public's attention once it was discovered. But that awareness allows less people to call this a theory. And maybe it will allow more people to get on board with the action steps that we'll continue unpacking in this discussion. So let me also focus in on a very specific aspect of being born and raised in a cult. Now, first of all, the word cult is very creepy, and it should be, okay? Not trying to normalize that. But a lot of people, when I say that word, they have this like this initial perspective of what they think I'm going to say. So some people will think it's some satanic cult or some other thing they've heard of. It may or may not surprise you to hear that this was a Christian cult. So that means that 100% of the abuse was done in the name of Jesus and God and the Bible, and 100% of the abusers called themselves Christians. Now, that being said, let's talk about, okay, there's a very big difference with an adult who's lost in life and looking for answers in community and acceptance and decides to join a cult or do something kooky with their life. So it's a free country, and you know what? That's your choice. There's a really big difference, though, in the children that are born and raised under a rock and not allowed to have influence or experience the outside world. So this is how I oversimplify it. Imagine being born under a rock, and you can tell a child anything. You can teach them to like any food or speak any language, correct? So imagine being born and raised under a rock, and you're told that red is blue. And every book you read and every song and every picture on the wall and every adult around you reinforces this belief that red is blue. So you grew up with the belief that red is blue, and you don't really think that's weird. Now, at a certain point, especially if you have a mind like me, you may start asking questions about, I feel like red could be red sometimes. And these people say red could be red. And in this instance, I feel like that makes sense. But to take it a step further, they say things like, well, everyone else believes red and red is red, but they're crazy, bad, blah, 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 harmful. We're the only ones that are peace, love, happy, God, safe, love you, whatever. So it's very confusing for a child, but we know how effective brainwashing is on adults who know better, who have experienced a different world. And just imagine what that's like for a child. Now, imagine what that's like to deprogram yourself as a child with no support, with no influence, with no education. Imagine what that's like to basically being raised on Mars and be told that the Earth is a flaming ball of fire, and to make that leap of faith anyways. And then you land on Earth and you're like, oh, I didn't burn. But then now what? So imagine surviving the unimaginable. And by the way, most of us don't survive. Statistically, less than 1% of victims are ever rescued. Who knows the real numbers? And statistically, the average lifespan for a victim is 7 years. A child, I hope I don't have to unpack this, but a child is not mentally or physically equipped or built to sustain that type of abuse. So imagine physically surviving, and then imagine landing in the world. And rhetorical question, unfortunately, where's the support for survivors? Where do you go? Who's going to help you? So there's physical safety, which is one important aspect of escaping. I'm going to talk about it in economic terms. The trafficker is going to come for their product. They're not just going to let you leave with all the information you have and with the value that you hold. So imagine physically escaping, and then what it's like to then overcome and find safety and peace and healing, and what that even means. Without the support of a family, without really existing on paper or having an education or like a credit score, without having any support from the government, without trauma-informed therapy or therapy at all, without basic human needs. That's the state that way too many survivors are facing. And yes, there's a massive rate of suicide, and it's not okay. And it's one of the things that I exist to end. But that being said, there's a lot to this story that the public doesn't comprehend because it's not talked about, because there is an intentional effort to censor, suppress, deny, and reject this entire topic. So I'm going to return to my rhetorical questions because I'm not here to tell you what to believe, but I am here to present the facts that you can then unpack for yourself. So on a federal government level, we don't have a dedicated agency that's focusing on combating human trafficking. Real quick, by the way, I'm not asking for more government involvement in anything. I'm just notifying you that they're not even pretending to care. Okay. So then another rhetorical question, which national media outlets are talking about this? But we know so much about XYZ celebrity's dress that she wore to XYZ event, but we don't know about children being trafficked in our country, hypothetically, because yes, we can sit here and split hairs about, is it thousands, is it hundreds of thousands, is it millions? I'm not saying it doesn't matter. I'm saying, does it really matter if it's a lot or way too, it's way too many. That's the truth. So you can look this up statistically. So for example, I'm going to give a few things that our federal government admitted to. In the last 2 years, 425,000 children went missing. This is according to the FBI. A significant number or percentage of them were trafficked. Our federal government also admitted that in the last 2 years, they lost track of 85,000 migrant children. Lost track of. Can you imagine being on a field trip and like losing track of a child? So even if it was only, let's say it was 100,000 children a year that were being trafficked in our country, wouldn't it be weird if our national media wasn't talking about it? Wouldn't that be completely unacceptable? Rhetorical question, unfortunately. So that being said, it's important to understand the intentionality behind this problem. And unfortunately, I believe that the answer to all these rhetorical questions and more is that child sex trafficking is the most profitable and the fastest growing and the second largest criminal enterprise on the planet. And it's generating at least $50 billion a year in the USA alone. It's important to know that statistics are only based on what's reported. And do you guys think the majority of this is reported? I have a real dark sense of humor and sarcastic humor, and it's an authentic smile. But if I laugh and smile about things that are really dark, that's my chosen form of healing and release. That's my disclaimer. It's not an apology. I'm just letting you know that I can't take any of this seriously because all of us are intelligent people. And let's say it this way, if they wanted to, they would. If they wanted to solve this problem, there are so many things that could be implemented that are very logical solutions. If we wanted to prioritize the safety of children in our country, you and I could brainstorm at least 10 great solutions to that, couldn't we? So why then is this allowed to thrive? I don't think that any of us would believe that this could be thriving, the second growing, the fastest, the most profitable, if it wasn't enjoying a lot of top cover and protection and secrecy from people in large positions of power. So I'm going to talk about the work we're doing today. And just a quick summary for those who have to leave, we do combat child trafficking in the USA. I co-founded a nonprofit called Uniting America. I'll put the link here in the chat. We combat child trafficking in the USA, and we do rescue operations, and we are also housing and sheltering survivors. Now we're working on building a survivor center, and it's one of many things that we could use support with because it's an insurmountable project. But that being said, I am paying it forward. Tens of thousands of children and I were never rescued. We were never reported. We were never part of the statistics you'll never read. So I know for a fact that way too many children are not making these numbers. And look, I'm a marketing professional. I live and die by data. I would like you to research the statistics on child trafficking. Sorry, my rooster. Research the data on child trafficking and tell me what you find. Especially since 2020, there is alarmingly inaccurate, inconsistent, and just non-existent data on this. So again, now I'm going to ask you one more rhetorical question. Why aren't our politicians talking about this? This is not a red versus blue topic. I'm saying as a system, as a political party, as our elected officials who are elected to protect and serve, let's look at them like salespeople real quick. Salty sense of humor, okay? Why would you not add the topic of protecting children to your sales pitch? Who would not go for that? Who would not be inclined to support? Who would not be united around that common goal? One more question. Why have we never even heard of the topic of child sex trafficking mentioned on a presidential debate stage? If you were a salesperson, would you not even at least pretend to care? Because look, we can all make sounds with our mouth. I'm not even talking about action. I'm saying, wouldn't they at least add that to their sales pitch? Would you not destroy your opponent if you were doing something about it, or at least pretending to care, and he was part of the problem? So this is so much bigger than red versus blue or politics versus whatever. This is not only a humankind crisis. Evil is targeting children. Evil is targeting children, and it is up to us. It is up to we, the people, to stand between them. It is up to us to advocate for the children like me and like the tens of thousands of us who did not have one strong, safe adult or advocate in our lives. Not one person did basic things to help. Now I'm going to tell you a personal story that emphasizes this point. As I said, I was mostly raised overseas throughout my childhood, but for 4 years of my childhood, from the age of 10 to 14 years old, I lived in Houston, Texas, Harris County, which, if you don't know, is one of the main hotspots of human trafficking in our country, Port City. Okay. From the age of 10 to 14 years old, obviously a child, not maybe 17 or 18, 10 to 14 years old, every single week, I worked on the streets, in restaurants and shopping malls and grocery stores and people's houses and famous landmarks and all over the place. And during those 4 years, not one adult, not one concerned citizen, not one law enforcement officer had the courage or the awareness to ask a child if they're okay and say, hey, what are you doing here? Are you okay? Where do you live? Where are your parents? Do you go to school? You don't go to school? Have you eaten today? Not one adult. Now I got to say it like this real quick, just because, yes, I had a lot of people, question me about which denomination and what, blah, blah, blah. Like I had all these questions. I had hundreds of thousands of people drive by me or give me money or whatever we were doing, watching us perform. Not one person asked the children. Not one person, I guess, thought it was weird. So, a lot of people have this heroic ideology of like, oh no, first of all, that would never happen in our country. Okay, well, here's proof. Okay, well, if I saw that, I would do something I would never let a child, okay? I hope so. And I'm here to inform people because awareness reduces the predator's ability to operate. And what I'm doing is raising people's awareness so that they can comprehend. Awareness means acknowledgement, right? My house is on fire. Now, if you pretend like your house isn't on fire and you're like, no, the national media isn't talking about it, and I've never seen that before, and that's never happened, and that'd be crazy, your house is going to burn to the ground. Now, if you acknowledge and then you can go do something about it, you could save something, right? So With awareness, there's making this message digestible for people. I'm not here to talk about the gruesome details. I'm not here to disgust you with the things I can't unsee. I'm here to give you bite-sized pieces of the truth that you can chew on and assimilate and digest. And I'm here to hopefully inspire you to take action and be part of the solution, because there is something every single person can do to make a significant difference. Let me say that differently. At the very least, so my story is complicated. My parents were not safe. If I had been returned home, that would not have been helpful. But at the very least, I could have spent less time on the streets. Maybe I could have had some semblance of a childhood. Maybe the tens of thousands of us could have had some semblance of a childhood. So please don't think that little old you can't do anything about it. Please don't think that it's such a big problem that we can't possibly make a dent, because I can promise you making a difference for one child matters. 10 children, 100 children, that matters. Now, let me give you a hypothetical example of what I would do today if I saw a child being trafficked, because I get this question often and I appreciate it. But there's different, perspectives here. There's people that think, oh no, big scary traffickers, I don't know what I would do. I've had grown-ass men say that to my face. I don't know what I would do if I'd see a child being trafficked. I'd be scared. Then there's people that just don't know what to look for. Like, let me put it this way. It's probably not going to be as obvious as you and I would like it to be. It's probably not going to be the man with a mask jumping out of an unmarked white van with a weapon. It's probably not going to be a malnourished, dirty child on the side of the road with a sign saying, help me. It may be the child in your neighborhood. It may be the child that goes to the school your children attend. It may be that family in the church sitting next to you. Unfortunately, predators hide in plain sight. And unfortunately, there are so many variables to this problem. It's not a one-size-fits-all problem, and therefore there's not really a one-size-fits-all solution. But again, if we, the people, were walking around aware, we could reduce the predator's ability to operate. Now, we could also empower survivors. We could empower children to know that there's someone out there that could help. At least one person. So I'm going to give you this hypothetical scenario of being in a public place. And this is a very realistic situation that a normal citizen is likely to encounter. I'm saying, like, if you're not combating trafficking, if you're not in law enforcement or some government agency. Let's pretend that you're at an airport and you see something that doesn't look right. Maybe there's a couple adults and some children. And if you pay attention to it, in every case, you're going to have some form of gut instinct. There's going to be something that's not right, but you can't exactly put your finger on it. And again, it's not going to be as obvious as you and I would like. But there's something wrong about that situation. You're not sure. Here's what I'm asking you not to do. Please don't keep walking. Please don't ignore it. And please don't call 911 and be like, hey, there's something weird and there's a guy and a kid and I don't know what, bye. Because they can't do anything with that. So here's what I would do. Now, yes, please use your best judgment. Okay. I want you to play dumb and ask questions. Here's what I would do. So we see the situation and something's not right. And I have a gut instinct. Now, my spidey senses are much more developed than the average person, but something's not right. And I'm trying to evaluate what's going on. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to, in a non-threatening way, play dumb, in a non-threatening way, I'm going to casually approach the situation. I'm going to act like a total ditz. I'm going to be chatty Cathy, and I'm just going to, oh, hey guys, how you doing? Yeah, going here too, blah, blah, blah. Oh, what guys going on? I am going to try to collect information. I'm going to try to engage them in conversation because I'm observing their response. I'm observing the body language of the adults and the children. I'm observing whether or not they're responding to my random questions in a normal way, age appropriate, whatever that is, or are they fearful? Are they nervous? Are they just not normal? And is the adult very controlling? Is he getting between me and the child? Is he not allowing the child to speak? Is the child looking up to the adult every time he needs to say something? Does the child seem scripted? Big red flag. I'm collecting data. Now, what this is allowing me to do is get a closer look at who these people are so that I can gain a good description of their physical appearance, as well as maybe some details that could help us track them. So for example, we're at an airport. Is this domestic or international? What terminal, what flight, what where are you going? The luggage, again, if you're playing dumb and asking questions, be like, oh, I'm so excited. Are going on vacation? Where are you guys going? Oh, do they have a lot of luggage? Do they not have a lot of luggage? All the descriptors that can help authorities hopefully do something about it. And it can at least inform you enough that you're sure whether or not this is something concerning. So here's the worst case scenario. Here's what's holding a lot of people back from playing dumb and asking questions. Ready? What if nothing's wrong? And maybe you're a little bit embarrassed, or maybe you did your part. That's the worst case scenario in terms of like, oh no, what if what if I look stupid? So please don't let your fear hold you back. Point one. Now, point two, if something's wrong, if the children seem scripted, if the more questions you ask, the more sketchy this looks. Here, again, it's difficult to give specifics because every situation is so different and there are so many variables. Here's one of the things that I want the untrained person to try to ask. Something along the lines of, to the children, are you excited? Oh, I'm going on vacation. Are you guys going on vacation? Oh, so cool. Were you guys going to the beach? Oh, are you excited? The reason is because every child under that controlled environment will be heavily scripted. So if you ask them something like, where are you going? Are these your parents? Are these your family? Do you like doing this? They will have a scripted answer. Something along the lines of, are you excited? They may not have a script for, but it's also very difficult for a child to fake excitement, especially a child in that type of controlled environment where joy is not necessarily abundant. So you may ask that question and the child may sort of freeze, and there may be, probably every time, a lot of darkness and emptiness in their eyes. If you're looking closely, their eyes will tell you a lot. It's not normal for a child. They may freeze. They may look up at the adult like, hey, I don't have a script for this, but it's a pretty important red flag that I want you to be on the lookout for. So I'm painting a very broad picture here because I'm trying to simplify and generalize this information so that it's generally applicable. But as you can imagine, there are so many specific variables that would require a specific strategy. But if you're not trained, if you don't have the ability to, look into this further, all of us can do something to reduce the predator's ability to operate. Now, I'm going to go back to the beginning of my story when I was talking about the international raids. So we were failed terribly by the judicial system and everyone who should have protected us, including the American government. Now, what it did was reduce the predator's ability to operate. So because of that type of negative press, the cult was forced to pretend to be less abusive, to quite literally burn the books, and to implement, forced safeguards for children that were still in the cult. So myself and the children born into the cult that are younger than me had a very different upbringing, although I would not wish it on any child, although it would make a hardened warrior cry. Our upbringing was almost night and day different than that of my oldest sibling. So a big part of my message here is that all of us can do something to be part of the solution, and that awareness matters. Now, if you're not able to invest your time and resources, you can support those of us who are on the front lines. But I want to also emphasize the importance of this starts at home. A lot of people have a heroic idea that, oh, I want to help, I want to kick down doors and get bad guys. And unfortunately, that's not how that works in the USA, and that's called kidnapping. But it's not always that heroic. Sometimes it's as simple as protecting your children at home, implementing safeguards, being aware of their internet activity. Internet safety is a whole thing, just because most children have an electronic device these days, and there are predators just inundating these platforms. So it starts with some pretty practical solutions. They don't necessarily have to be fancy, but they matter. Sorry, that's my dog in the background. So how much more time do I have on this talk? Because there's a lot to talk about. Sorry, Tony, you're muted. I want to talk about the cult.
We're about ready to go into Q&A time, so.
Okay. I'm going to say something really quick and we can unpack it in the Q&A, but I wrote this late at night and this is the 10 rules of every cult. It is the cult playbook that I want you to read and understand that this applies quite broadly. And it also applies to a lot of our society today. So every cult has a playbook. 1, they must not know. Cults have layers. The outer public layer often looks pretty and happy, like a corporate brochure with like happy smiling people and we do good things. But there's inner layers that even cult members may not be aware of unless they're in some high ranking form of leadership. So rule number 2, it is written, take it by faith. No questions, God said so, or the prophet or whoever. 3, we are the only ones who are right. Everyone else believes red is red, but we're the only ones with peace, love, God, safety, the truth. 4, we make our own rules. 5, this is what's best. This is God's highest will. If you ask my parents today, they would tell you that is the best way I could have raised you. This is what's best. 6 is recruit. Full stop. 7, you must earn your place. Participation is not optional. With my dark sense of humor, in order to be a cult leader, you have to be the most crazy. Participation is not optional and you earn your rank. 8 is support by whatever means necessary. For most of these organizations, financial contributions are their lifeblood. Financial contributions are a priority. And those who give the most money have the most power or freedom within the cult. Number 9 is dedication. Do whatever it takes. Forsaking friends and family, making incredible sacrifices, sacrificing your children, enduring endless pain and discomfort. Do whatever it takes. God demands this. This is God's highest will. This is what's needed. Number 10, if you're not for us, you're against us. So that's an oversimplified cult dynamic, but I want you to think of how that might apply to society today. And what I'm specifically focused on in today's discussion is how this affects children. That doesn't mean that kooky adults aren't to blame for their kooky decisions and how they hurt people. I'm just saying that it's very different when the second generation is born into this ideology. They have no options, they have no safe adult, and a child is not physically able to outsmart or overpower an adult. So escaping isn't really an option in these controlled environments. And like we've discussed, where would you even go? 5-year-old me in Brazil, 10-year-old me in Mexico, like where would I run down the street and go to? So there's a lot about this that the public needs to be aware of, not specific to cults, as much as specific to the present modern day form of human slavery that is more prevalent than any other time of history. We have more slaves today than in any other point in history. Did you guys know that? I hope that's not okay with any of us. I hope that no one's comfortable funding this with our tax dollars. I hope that people are ready to demand answers and, most importantly, seek out solutions. So I wanted to thank you guys for being here and for being willing to be aware and listen, because it's a difficult topic. But if we don't do something about this, who will?
Great. Thank you so much, Kim. Give Kim a big hand, besides Bill, who just raised his. We'll get to your question in just a minute. Yeah, we have a couple questions within the chat, and I think you may have answered or partially answered, at least gave us an idea. From Quinn, she asked, how do you know a child is being trafficked? You gave us a couple pointers of, asking questions and things like that. Can you elaborate on that anymore? Obviously, I'm sure you have many things you could talk about on that, but
yeah, it's difficult to narrow it down to specifics because so many instances are so different in terms of how they look and the dynamics involved. So it's not always very obvious. And there's a lot of this happening behind closed doors that the public's not going to see unless you're part of this industry. So it's difficult to really pinpoint the specifics of it. But what I would ask, because I always try to bring this close to home so that it's not this big, far, far away problem that we can't do anything about. Because to be quite honest, like us being worried about, things over here that we're not going to do anything about doesn't really help. But what I would challenge people is to get involved in your community. get involved in your school boards, get involved in your local politics, elections, financing, whatever it is. Check on what's happening there. And I have one more call to action. Check on, first of all, research the statistics of what's happening or what's being reported, at least in your community, like Susan did. And then write your elected officials and say, what are we doing about this? What's your plan of action here? How many arrests have you been made? How many prosecutions and convictions? What are we doing about this? Where's the prevention education in schools? Where's the budget? Where's the task force? So it's a little bit of do your own research, and it's a lot of educating yourself and gut instincts and intuition and being willing to take action. The action might look different in every situation, but it's asking you not to do nothing. If something seems off, please look further and contact us if there's something we can assist with, because we do actually do this work of rescuing children.
Excellent. Thank you. And then a couple questions Quinn and myself asked. What was the name of the cult that you belong to? It's good to have knowledge in case somebody says they're with this organization. We can immediately be suspicious.
So this cult is sort of dissolved now. It's more like an online church version where, of course, they still accept donations, but it's more like an online church form of this. So let me put it this way. I'm focused on the people that are currently harming children to this day. Mm-hmm. So the name of this cult began in the late 60s as the Children of God. Then it changed and rebranded many times, as most cults do. It was the Family of Love, then it was the Family, and now it's the Family International. So again, to prove my point, if you look at their website, it's happy smiling people, all outdated photos, by the way, from like 20 years ago, but happy smiling people and humanitarian aid and some yay, we do good things and we love God and yay. That's obviously just the front.
Yep. Okay. I remember the Children of God very well. Thank you. From my not participation or anything, but I'm a former law enforcement officer. And speaking of that, Bill Buchanan, you have a question.
Yes, Kim, thanks very much for a very eye-opening presentation. And sitting here as a former federal law enforcement officer, I'm thinking, holy cow, I mean, are we missing, are we just not even seeing the tip of the iceberg? The whole iceberg is submerged. But let me ask you this, because I have to go to a face-to-face meeting here pretty quickly with some former law enforcement types. And I want to kind of, give them a brief summary of this presentation of yours. When I was working active duty for the FBI, there was an organization called the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, under the aegis, of the FBI. I never got involved in it. I knew the special agent who was kind of coordinating here in the San Francisco Field Division. Have you ever had any interaction with them? Are they effective? There's an 800 number, for instance. I think it's called 800 the Lost. If you have suspicions about something, you can call that number. What's your assessment of their effectiveness?
So they are one of the few sources that offer statistics that I sometimes reference. In other words, compared to other people who keep statistics, they seem to be more consistent with keeping numbers updated. Now, I'm going to say this to them, but also broadly applied to any other organization who is saying that they're in this fight. I want you to be very skeptical, as I know you are, and I want you to research who's behind them. Who's behind the people collecting this data? So on the one hand, I see it as a positive thing that it's being talked about somewhere and that some data is being collected so that people can stop calling this a theory. But in general, do I think it's actually accurately representative? No. But is it better than other resources? Yes. Now, in terms of what's the aftermath, if you call that number, then what happens? Again, this is applied more broadly than NCMEC, or National Center of Missing and Exploited Children. There are so many nonprofits and NGOs and all these different organizations who claim to do things. And again, that's why I'm asking you to research them. I'm going to give you some examples. Recently, I was looking for a safe house for 2 survivors who met every criterion qualification for a child sex trafficking survivor. And I was contacting different nonprofits who claim to house and support survivors. One of them offered us a $25 gift card to Walmart. they are receiving millions of dollars a year in donations to house and support survivors. And that's what we were given. So this applies pretty broadly. There's a lot of bad actors. There's a lot of people pretending to be part of the solution who are actually part of the evil. I want you to look into their financials. I want you to see how many millions or how much money are they receiving and what are they doing with it. Look for the receipts, look for the results. If they're receiving millions of dollars, but they're not arresting people or rescuing children in the USA, I have a problem with that. Now, beyond that, I want you to actually verify. So if you were to do like me and even pretend that you're looking for a place for survivors, call them and see what type of response you get. I don't want to waste anyone's time, but if you were to call them and go through the process as if a real person needed help, it may be alarming to see what you encounter. Now, there's also, a few other layers of complication here, just because there's a hotline. So let's pretend a child can somehow escape or separate themselves in order to call for help. Let's pretend that call's not being tracked. Like, let's pretend they can get away with that safely. What happens then? Is there like a SWAT team that jumps down and helps them? So a lot of times asking for help is actually a very dangerous thing for a child victim to do, because it ends up in much worse consequences for them. So many examples. I won't tell about that.
Let me ask you this question. I apologize because I have to get out the door. But it appears to me that the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children is a way for the Federal Bureau of Investigation to gather statistics on missing and exploited children. I don't know of any statute other than kidnapping, if it goes that far, for the FBI to get involved from a case point. What I'm saying here is that how is a case opened under what federal statute? The FBI investigates almost 200 federal statutes. So there's I'll run this past the group I'm going to meet with in about an hour.
Yeah,
say, hey, anybody ever work a missing? That's local, and I mean I talk to chiefs of police, local chiefs of police. This subject has never come up. I'll ask them, what is your major crime problem in Fairfax? Oh, it's stolen bicycles. Oh, okay. That's what I mean. Is there a way for the FBI to get involved beyond just for instance, the kidnapping aspect?
Sure. Such an important question to unpack. So I started this conversation by saying we don't have a dedicated agency. Now, the FBI has a lot of things to handle. We should have a dedicated agency that focuses on combating human trafficking. Do you agree? So because we need more information, because our elected officials need more information to really solve this problem in a more effective way. First of all, there's a lack of, we'll say, organizational structure around solving this issue. So that's a big point one. Like, again, it's not law enforcement's fault or the FBI agent's fault that they're not trained for this, that they don't have the resources for this. That's also intentional. But I'm saying it's not the people on the front lines. It's the leadership level that isn't providing this training. Then it's the lack of resources, support, budget, etc. I'm not a federal agent, so there's a lot more that you could speak to than I am sure. But I would love for you to ask your colleagues, what could be done about this and why aren't things be done? What are they categorized as? So to your point, if it's not kidnapping, how does that work? So for example, who's tracking the 85,000 missing children, missing migrant children? Where's the investigation? I'm going to go through some things real fast because there's a lot here. Look at the DOJ website. I don't know if you guys are aware. So the DOJ website has some information about child sex trafficking. I'm going to speed this up because it's a whole thing that I want you to look into. As of May of this year, that page about child sex trafficking on the DOJ.gov website was reduced from about this much information to now this much information. And they removed a lot of information specific to children being trafficked across the southern border. So again, I wish I had better answers in terms of why this problem isn't logically being addressed. But I hope you'll join me in finding those answers.
Great. We have a couple questions asked a question asked by a couple people that are interested, and myself included, and I'll add my name onto that, is how did you escape from this cult that you were a member of? Unwilling member.
Well, as a child, you can't really consent. So that applies to all of us. That being said, you know, I use the word escape because if I say I left the cult when I was 20, it sounds like I could just leave at any time. And people are like, why didn't you leave sooner? People who know what they're talking about don't ask that question. But what I'm saying is that the word escape applies because it's accurate, but it wasn't like some big heroic, you know, Hollywood style thing. What happened is that, you know, again, I had just turned 20. I was living in Mexico from a young age. And again, I was the youngest of my siblings. I was raised with a bunch of kids. And I'm going to soften this by saying, you know, if you didn't comply, you got in a lot worse trouble. And I could see that from an early age. So I understood you sort of had to go along to get along. So I was a very like good girl and I worked really hard and all these things. So by the time I was, you know, a young adult, I had a lot of, I know it's weird, but like cult, like responsibility, or like I was very trusted in this cult. Like, for example, I managed the finances for this compound. So I had a lot of responsibilities. Also was never really like a child. So, you know, I can't really relate this to a normal child that age. That being said, when I was 20 years old, I just saw the opportunity. At that time, I was asking a lot of questions and like, you know, what's going on here? So I can't say that I was like attempting to escape this whole time, but there were many times that I tried to run away. There were a lot of times that I wanted to leave, but I didn't have a resource. Where would I have gone? Like, serious question, not only overseas, but also, okay, let's say like I escape into the USA, where do you go next? So all that to say, when I was in my early 20s, I just saw an opportunity where basically I was supposed to go somewhere for 2 weeks and I had like approval to go. And normally we weren't allowed to go anywhere by ourselves, but I was going to go somewhere to make money for the cult. So I just saw like an opportunity. So I packed my few belongings and I got on an overnight bus and I was in Mexico. And instead of going here, I went there and I went to a friend's house who, you know, whole long story short, but I just sort of got away and they didn't realize it for long enough that by the time they realized it, it kind of just worked out like that. They couldn't really come get me is the point. So it's not like some big, you know, jumped over the wall type escape. But, you know, again, I want to also broaden this to other survivors where there's this misconception, you know, again, like you could just leave at any time or like, oh, you could just run away. This wasn't my experience, but in many survivors' cases that I've talked to, when another person tried to escape, they were shot on sight. So again, in economic terms, you know, these traffickers will protect their product. And or they don't want you to just be out there in the world sharing the knowledge that you have. So it's not necessarily something you can just leave at any time, especially as a child. But that's my story.
Cool. Thank you. All right. Paul Coleman has a question.
Thank you. Thank you, Tony. Kim, that was fascinating, I have to say. I have a background in anti-money laundering, and so I was very keen to hear you speak, because you've heard of the organization Polaris, have you?
Yes.
Yes, where they look at all the wider types of human trafficking. But it's the whole point about my relationship with Polaris was attending conferences where the whole point is about, you know, people making money out of this. So there's, you know, and it's always difficult for criminals to demonstrate where they get their money from. They can't say, well, I belong to a cult that's making a fortune out of human trafficking or child trafficking. But I mean, just sort of satisfy my curiosity. I mean, these cults, they're not all, you know, the first thing when you say cult is, I think, well, 100 people in a compound and they're all sort of, you know, dancing around and such like. But more likely, just if you could confirm this, I mean, these are people who are going about their lives and their business just like anybody else, really. They're to the outside world who are part of the cult. It's just everything is hunky-dory, if you know what I mean. It's so how do you know that there's a cult around that's that it's happening? You know, it just seems everybody has a way of looking normal, don't they?
Right, absolutely. Such a good question. And I also want to focus on the financial aspect of it, because talk about money laundering on an international scale. So a few things. How do you know it's a cult, or what's the cult? How do they kind of operate in plain sight? So there's different ways cults can look depending on their practices, belief systems, whatever. This particular cult, we did have compounds. I'm gonna use the cult terminology. It's all weird, okay? But they had, what we would call compounds, or centers of, between 50 to like 150 people. So, 30, 50, 75 kids or whatever it was. So to the outside world, I hope we didn't look normal, but realize that most of these were in third world countries. So just unpack the dynamic there, right? So you go to these impoverished countries and there's a bunch of white people living behind this big, I don't know if you guys are familiar with third world countries, but the wealthy there are, mansions are very common for the ultra wealthy. So you don't really see past those gates or doors or the security, whatever. But that being said, as a local in whatever foreign country, you see all these white people and they're already, they're foreigners, so they're different and all that kind of stuff. So you may discount that as like, oh, that's culturally different and somehow, I guess, acceptable to them. So I think it depends on the dynamic of how the cult looks. So for example, with the Jehovah's Witnesses, they don't live communally. They live in their own house. And you may, sorry, let me get my dog real quick. You may not recognize them as being the same kind of system or structure. Tank, come inside. Sorry. But it depends on a lot of things. So for example, there's various types of Mormons and there's different things. I'm not saying that all these cults are equally as bad. I'm just saying all of these are different examples of how cults can look. Now, again, my emphasis is not on what adults decide to do with their lives. It's on how it's impacting children. So my perspective here is, again, if you're an adult and you want to go do something kooky with your life, okay, cool. But you can't bring kids into it. Like, here's the line in the sand. That's not religious freedom. I'm going to be real, like, randomly weird here, but like, if you want to go have an orgy in the forest, like, whatever, bro, do you. You can't bring kids into it. That's the line in the sand. If you want to go to strip club, do it. Can't bring kids there. We should just, there's no further discussion. So I think as a society, the failure is the government or whatever, policies need to be implemented to ensure the children's safety. Now, broadening that to the financial realm, which is a whole other book I could write, I want to give you the dynamic of the financial money laundering scheme that we were, it's weird to say involved in, but that was happening in that cult. So children are a big form of money, of making money. Just to give you an example, because you have a financial background, imagine collecting cash in whatever local currency, stacks of cash, and mailing at the time stacks of cash to the leadership. So the whole tithing system that's frequent in a lot of churches. Pretty much every organization wants you to, they collect a toll. So you're sending all this money to leadership. Often the regular people are living in impoverished conditions. Some people starving or like literally eating out of the garbage can. You're sending all this money to the leadership, wherever that nucleus is, which is where I happen to live. So, this is a whole other part of the story, but my parents were leadership, like was said earlier. I've done the math on this cult. The amount of money generated between the amount of people living in there over a 50-year span, it was at least a couple billion being funneled around, unreported for, no taxes paid. Where does that money go and what do they do with it? So I appreciate the people that are on the side of the financial investigation aspect of it. These days with more digital currency, it's a lot more hopefully traceable, but it's also a lot more difficult with, Bitcoin and all these other aspects of things to go hunt for. So I don't know if that answers your question, but cults can look different depending on their belief system or structure. For sure, if you see children that don't look like they're okay, regardless if it's a cult or not, I want you to look further,
Right.
No,
last question. Susan raised her hand.
First of all, I want to thank you, Kim. I took 5 pages of notes. You just gave a master class. I've been in airports a lot, and I wish I had known what to look for. So first question, if I see something and I determine it's suspicious, who do I go to in the airport? Do I go to TSA? I mean, I don't know. Tell me.
Yeah, good question. And my sigh of was, okay, because unfortunately, as we've been unpacking, the powers that be who could do something about this often fail to. So I'm hesitant to be like, yeah, go, okay, here's what I'm going to say. Report it to local authorities anyways. Report it to anyone who is everyone. If I was there, I would absolutely report it to not only TSA, hey, who's the manager, who's at this, like I would go to the highest up that I can. I would also contact 911. I would also have to follow up on it. So again, with the amount of information or data that you've collected, okay, so what happened to those two children? They were going to this destination. I know that as citizens, there's not a whole lot there should be a lot more that we could really do, but I would report it to everyone who is anyone, and then I would report it to Uniting America.
Okay.
That is why we founded this nonprofit. It is very frustrating that there are not enough action being taken, even when we sort of do their work for them and present the case. When they fail to prosecute, oof. It is very
do these not, because I know I go to Charity Navigator to see what charities and nonprofits are viable, etc. Would that be a good thing to do before you give money to any of these sham operations?
I highly recommend that you very intrinsically research these nonprofits before you support them. But I will also say this, there's a lot of these rating systems. I'm very familiar with charities and nonprofits. By the way, the cult operated like a charity, a lot of times charities are fronts for nefarious activity. I'm not saying all of them, obviously, but I'm saying I want you to, have that in mind. Now, specifically when it comes to child sex trafficking, I'm going to say it real directly. A lot of people that are supposed to be fighting the problem are part of the problem. A lot of people are positioning themselves to get access to children. Disgusting.
Charities are a cover.
So they're a cover. They're, again, I'm just saying it broadly. But that being said, these rating systems like Charity Navigator and GuideStar and these others, I think it's one good data point that you can reference, but I'm also very familiar with how they rank. And here's what it is. If you have this list of expenses and you recategorize this as that, then you up your ranking. So it's not like they're going to come really like check on you or audit you. It's more like that.
Good to know. But I just want to personally thank you. You are so articulate, you are so impassioned, you are so informed. And if there is ever going to be any kind of solution, I think you're going to be the person that is behind it.